From the moment we are born, we are immersed in a complex system of rules and norms that dictate almost every aspect of our lives, from what we eat to the decisions we make in our relationships. These rules often appear to be natural, as if they have always existed, but the truth is we are part of an invisible agreement, a social contract, that shapes our behavior in ways we rarely question. The social contract is an idea that emerged from political philosophers, most notably Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Each of them, while holding differing views, addressed the question of how human society is organized and how laws and norms are created to govern behavior. What is most curious about this contract is that, unlike the legal contracts we explicitly sign, this one is silent. It doesn't require our signature, but it exerts a deep control over us, influencing our values, beliefs, and even the most trivial decisions of daily life. What exactly is the social contract? Simply put, it is the agreement we make, or the one imposed on us, to live together in society. It is not written on a piece of paper, nor is it formally signed. In reality, it is a set of expectations and obligations that shape us as individuals and as members of a collective. And the question arises, how aware are we of these invisible rules? And to what extent are they fair, or are they in fact limiting our freedom? The idea of a social contract forces us to think about the conventions we follow every day. From obeying the law to accepting the roles assigned to us within families, corporations, and nations, we are constantly participating in this unspoken agreement. But in doing so, we ask, what would happen if we chose to reject this contract? What holds us back from questioning or even breaking these norms that are imposed on us? What if the truth is that in many situations we live in a freedom that is only apparent, a freedom granted through constant concessions to social conformity? The social contract isn't simply an academic concept, it's a living, breathing force that impacts how we interact with the world. When we follow societal norms, we may not realize that we are abiding by a set of invisible rules that are not necessarily written by any governing body, but are instead the result of centuries of cultural, social, and political evolution. From the very first moments of our lives, we are taught to respect certain customs, to obey authority, and to fit into predefined roles. These rules are reinforced by families, schools, workplaces, and governments. And yet, many of us rarely question the validity or fairness of these rules. Why is that? Is it because we believe these rules are inherently good and necessary, or is it because we've been conditioned to obey without ever considering the alternatives? At the heart of this social contract lies a paradox. While we think we are free, our actions are largely determined by a system of expectations that we never signed up for. Think about the countless decisions you make every day, from the way you dress to how you speak, even to the opinions you hold. These decisions are not made in a vacuum. They are influenced by the unspoken rules of society. The social contract is not just a political theory. It is a system that permeates every aspect of our lives, even in the most personal moments. And yet, despite its pervasive influence, we rarely stop to question its legitimacy or its implications. What would happen if we decided to reject it, to step outside of the bounds of the social contract? Would we find true freedom, or would we encounter chaos? These are the questions that challenge us to think more critically about the forces that shape our lives. The reality is that rejecting the social contract isn't as simple as just saying no to the norms and rules that govern us. The moment we attempt to step outside of these expectations, we are met with resistance from society. There are consequences for defying the social contract, whether it's through legal penalties, social ostracism, or economic isolation. In a way, the social contract enforces itself, ensuring that even those who question or rebel against it are brought back into line. But this raises an important question. Are we really free, or are we simply prisoners of a system that we've never fully understood or agreed to? As we continue to explore the ideas of Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, we will see how their views on the social contract offer insights into the ways in which this invisible agreement governs our lives and how it shapes the very fabric of the society we live in today. For Thomas Hobbes, the nature of humanity was inherently chaotic and self-interested. In his seminal work, Leviathan, Hobbes argues that without a governing authority, human beings would be trapped in a state of constant conflict, where life would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. According to Hobbes, the natural state of humans is one of war of all against all, driven by fear, selfishness, and the desire for self-preservation. This bleak vision of human nature underpins his justification for the social contract, which he believes is necessary to establish peace and prevent societal collapse. Hobbes's view centers around the idea that in order to escape the anarchy of the natural state, individuals must surrender their natural rights to a sovereign power, which would have the authority to enforce laws and maintain order. In exchange, the people would gain security and protection from the violence and disorder that otherwise would be rampant. Hobbes's theory rests heavily on the role of fear in motivating human behavior. Fear, in Hobbes's view, is the primary force that drives people to give up their freedoms in exchange for the promise of security. The fear of death, chaos, and destruction leads individuals to seek the safety of a structured society, even if that means sacrificing their autonomy. In Hobbesian philosophy, this surrender is not only rational but necessary. Without it, humanity would revert to a state of constant war, where no one could trust anyone else, and survival would be a matter of brute strength rather than cooperation. The sovereign, therefore, has the legitimate authority to impose strict control over individuals because it is through this control that the promise of stability and peace can be maintained. But this brings us to a critical question. Does this control come at the cost of true freedom? Hobbes seems to suggest that in exchange for the protection of life, the people must relinquish the right to challenge the sovereign's authority, even if it means living under oppressive rule. The fear of chaos, then, becomes a justification for authoritarian control. For Hobbes, a powerful and centralized authority, be it a monarchy or a dictatorship, is the only way to ensure peace. The state's role is to protect individuals from their own worst impulses, and this requires the concentration of power in the hands of a single ruler or governing body. However, this brings up an uncomfortable dilemma. At what point does the preservation of order tip into tyranny? Hobbes's framework relies on the assumption that the sovereign will act in the best interest of society, but history shows that those in power are often more interested in maintaining their own power than in serving the public good. This raises a disturbing question. If the only way to maintain order is through absolute control, are we truly free? And if we are willing to sacrifice our freedoms for the sake of security, how can we ensure that the government doesn't take advantage of this fear to impose even greater restrictions on our lives? Hobbes's view of human nature and his advocacy for a strong, controlling sovereign still resonate in modern politics. In today's world, governments justify surveillance, strict laws, and punitive measures as necessary to maintain social order and prevent crime. The idea that security must come at the expense of personal freedom is a theme that continues to play out in debates about government overreach, civil liberties, and individual rights. The ongoing struggle between the need for safety and the desire for freedom is a direct legacy of Hobbes's philosophy. Whether it is through the justification of surveillance programs, strict border controls, or the suppression of dissent, the underlying logic of Hobbes's social contract is still very much alive in contemporary society. But this brings us back to an essential question. When does the fear of chaos justify the restrictions placed upon us? The fear of a breakdown in social order is a powerful motivator, but it also raises the specter of sacrificing our own agency in exchange for stability. As we give up more of our freedoms to ensure our safety, are we becoming more secure, or are we simply creating the conditions for a new kind of oppression? Hobbes's social contract presents us with a stark view of the world, where freedom is traded for security and where the fear of anarchy justifies the concentration of power. This tension between freedom and control, between chaos and order, remains a central issue in how we understand the nature of government and our role as individuals within it. The question is, can we truly be free if we live in constant fear of what might happen without that control, or are we simply sacrificing our autonomy for the illusion of safety? Unlike Hobbes, John Locke held a much more optimistic view of human nature. He believed that humans are inherently rational and capable of self-governance. For Locke, the social contract was not about surrendering personal freedoms out of fear, but rather about establishing a government that would protect the Natural rights of individuals, life, liberty, and property. According to Locke, in the state of nature, individuals are free and equal, guided by reason and the desire to preserve their rights. However, Locke also recognized that the state of nature, though more peaceful than Hobbes's chaotic vision, was still imperfect. Without a neutral authority to resolve conflicts, individuals could find their property or freedom violated, leading to instability and insecurity. Therefore, Locke argued, a social contract is necessary to create a government that protects these fundamental rights while respecting individual freedoms. However, Locke's ideal vision of government is grounded in the concept of consent. The government, according to Locke, derives its legitimacy from the consent of the governed. The social contract is a mutual agreement where individuals voluntarily enter into society and agree to abide by its laws in exchange for the protection of their natural rights. In Locke's theory, the government is a servant of the people, and its primary duty is to safeguard individual freedoms and property. If a government fails to uphold these rights or becomes oppressive, Locke argues, the people have not only the right but the duty to revolt and establish a new government that will better serve their interests. This revolutionary spirit became a foundational principle of liberal democracy and influenced countless movements for political change throughout history. Yet, Locke's idealism is put to the test when we examine modern society. While Locke envisions a government that exists for the sole purpose of protecting individual rights, today's political systems often seem more concerned with maintaining power than ensuring freedom. In practice, many modern governments claim to uphold Locke's principles of liberty and property, but the reality is far more complicated. What happens when the government claims to protect our rights, but in doing so imposes laws, policies, and structures that disproportionately benefit powerful elites or infringe on the rights of the very people it is meant to serve? How much of our freedom is truly protected when the social contract is manipulated to favor political or economic interests? This brings us to a troubling question. Are we genuinely free, as Locke envisioned, or are we simply living under the illusion of choice? Locke's ideal government was one that would be transparent, accountable, and responsive to the needs of its citizens. However, in modern democracies, citizens are often presented with the illusion of choice, particularly in the context of elections. While we are given the opportunity to vote, our choices are frequently limited by the political system, where candidates and policies are shaped by powerful interest groups, media influence, and corporate funding. The illusion of choice is reinforced by the idea that we are living in a democracy where our voice matters and where we have a say in how we are governed. But the reality is often that the choices we are given are constrained by factors far beyond our control. In this sense, Locke's vision of a government that exists to serve the people and protect their rights becomes a mere shadow of its original intent. Locke's theory also assumes that the social contract is based on mutual agreement and consent. However, in the real world, many individuals are born into societies where the social contract has already been established long before they could offer their consent. The laws, norms, and systems that govern us are handed down from previous generations, often without our active participation in their creation. This raises important questions about the true nature of consent. Are we truly consenting to the social contract, or are we merely following a set of rules that were established long before we had a say? And if we are not fully consenting to these rules, how much of our freedom has been compromised by a system that we did not agree to in the first place? The idea that we live in a democracy with the freedom to choose and the right to alter our government is one of the key elements of Locke's theory that continues to influence political thought today. Yet the question remains, how much of our freedom is real, and how much is an illusion crafted by systems of power that have learned to co-opt the language of liberty for their own gain? Locke believed that a legitimate government exists only with the consent of the governed, but when that consent is manufactured or constrained by factors like wealth, media control, and institutional power, can we still claim that we are living in a system that truly reflects the will of the people? In the end, Locke's vision of a government formed to protect individual rights and freedoms challenges us to question whether the systems in place today truly fulfill that purpose, or whether we are simply living in a system that manipulates our perceptions of freedom to maintain control. Jean-Jacques Rousseau offered a radically different perspective on the social contract, one that challenges the very idea of individual liberty in the context of society. In his work, The Social Contract, Rousseau argued that true freedom is not found in the isolation of the individual, but in collective participation in the creation of laws and the shaping of society. Rousseau's concept of the social contract centers on the idea of the general will, a collective will that represents the common good of society as a whole, unlike Hobbes and Locke, who focused on the individual's relationship with a sovereign authority. Rousseau emphasized the need for individuals to come together as equals to form a collective body politic that reflects the will of all its members. According to Rousseau, true freedom can only be achieved when individuals submit to the general will, because it is through participation in this collective will that individuals align their personal desires with the common good. But Rousseau's theory raises a profound paradox. If true freedom is achieved through submission to the general will, does that mean freedom is, in fact, a form of obedience? Rousseau argues that the social contract binds individuals to the general will, but in doing so, it also frees them from the chaos of individual desires and selfishness. This presents a dilemma. In order to be truly free, we must give up some of our personal autonomy and submit to the collective decisions of society. This leads to a potentially dangerous situation where the concept of the common good can justify the suppression of individual rights. Rousseau's vision of freedom, then, is not one of unrestricted personal liberty, but rather one where individuals are compelled to act in accordance with the collective interest, even if it goes against their personal desires or interests. The idea of the general will is inherently democratic, as it requires the active participation of all members of society in determining what is best for the community. However, this democratic ideal also presents a significant problem. Who decides what the general will is? In theory, the general will represents the collective interest, but in practice, determining what is truly in the best interest of society is fraught with difficulty. The danger arises when those in power claim to represent the general will, but in reality, their decisions may reflect the interests of a particular group or faction rather than the society as a whole. Rousseau's idea of the general will is not immune to manipulation. In fact, history has shown that leaders who claim to act in the name of the general will can easily justify oppressive actions and totalitarian rule, using the rhetoric of the common good to suppress dissent and enforce conformity. In this sense, Rousseau's theory contains the seeds of a dangerous potential for tyranny. The tension between individual liberty and the collective good that Rousseau introduces is still a central issue in modern political thought. His notion of the social contract challenges us to think about the limits of freedom in a democratic society. Rousseau's theory asks us to consider whether freedom can truly exist in a world where the state holds the power to determine what is best for everyone. The paradox of Rousseau's philosophy is that, while it offers a vision of a society that promotes equality and collective decision-making, it also raises questions about the nature of freedom and the risks of too much state control. In a modern context, we can see how this tension plays out in debates over government intervention in areas such as healthcare, education, and economic policy. In each of these areas, the state asserts that it is acting for the common good, but the question remains: to what extent does the state's interpretation of the general will truly align with the needs and desires of the individuals it governs? Rousseau's emphasis on collective decision-making and the submission of individual will to the general will also brings us to a crucial point. The idea that the state can claim to know what is best for its citizens leads to an inevitable erosion of personal autonomy. In modern society, we often hear calls for greater state intervention in the name of social justice or equality. Yet, as Rousseau warned, the very act of imposing laws for the common good can lead to the suppression of personal freedoms. The paradox at the heart of Rousseau's theory is that, while he advocates for freedom, his framework for achieving freedom requires a level of state control and societal conformity that can potentially limit individual autonomy. In this light, the social contract that Rousseau proposes becomes a double-edged sword. It offers the promise of freedom through collective participation, but it also risks undermining the very freedoms it seeks to protect. Ultimately, Rousseau's view of the social contract forces us to confront a fundamental question about the nature of freedom. Can we truly be free if we are constantly bound by the rules and obligations of society, even if those rules are designed to protect the collective good? His work asks us to consider the delicate balance between individual liberty and the collective needs of society, and whether the pursuit of the common good can justify the limitations on personal freedom. In the modern world, where issues of equality, justice, and government intervention are as relevant as ever, Rousseau's ideas remain a powerful reminder of the complexities and contradictions that lie at the heart of any social contract. As we navigate the demands of modern society, we must ask ourselves, does the pursuit of the common good justify the erosion of our individual freedoms, or does true freedom require the ability to challenge the very structures that claim to act in our best interests? In the modern world, the idea of the social contract has evolved far beyond its philosophical origins in the works of Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau. Today, it extends beyond the realm of government and law, deeply influencing aspects of our daily lives in ways that are often invisible to us. The traditional social contract, as articulated by these thinkers, was centered around the relationship between individuals and the state. But in the 21st century, we find that this contract is no longer confined to just the political sphere. It has expanded to include the cultural, social, and economic systems that shape our beliefs, desires, and behaviors. Whether it's the way we engage with social media, our reliance on corporate institutions, or the expectations placed on us by society, the modern social contract is everywhere, and it's often far less explicit than the one Hobbes, Locke, or Rousseau envisioned. One of the key elements of the modern social contract is the increasing influence of large corporations and media organizations. In today's world, corporations play an enormous role in shaping societal norms, preferences, and even laws. The relationship between individuals and these corporations is a kind of social contract in itself. We trade our attention, personal data, and purchasing power for the products, services, and entertainment these companies provide. Yet, in this transaction, we rarely question the terms of the agreement. We are bombarded by advertisements, social media algorithms, and other corporate-driven forces that subtly shape our desires and decisions. We are told that our choices are ours to make, yet many of these choices are heavily influenced or even determined by forces beyond our control. The so-called freedom we experience in the marketplace is often an illusion, as our decisions are shaped by the very systems we believe we are choosing freely within. The rise of digital technologies and the proliferation of social media further complicate the concept of freedom within the modern social contract. Social media platforms, while offering unprecedented connectivity, also enforce a set of unspoken rules about how we present ourselves, how we interact with others, and what is considered acceptable behavior. These platforms influence not only what we think and feel, but also how we act in the world. Through algorithms that reward certain behaviors, such as likes, shares, and engagement, social media platforms shape our desires and values in ways that often go unnoticed. While we may feel that we are freely expressing ourselves, the reality is that our expressions are curated by invisible forces designed to maximize engagement and profit. In this sense, the modern social contract has shifted from a relationship between citizens and the state to one where individuals are subtly governed by corporate interests and the digital economy. Even within the realms of politics and governance, the modern social contract has taken on a more complex and insidious form. While Locke's vision of a government formed to protect individual rights remains a foundational principle in many democratic societies, the actual functioning of modern democracies often betrays that ideal. Citizens are presented with the illusion of choice through elections, where they can vote for their preferred leaders and policies. However, this apparent freedom is constrained by systemic factors that limit the true agency of the populace. Political parties, media outlets, and powerful interest groups manipulate public opinion, ensuring that the political system serves the interests of the few rather than the many. In many cases, the real choices available to voters are dictated by powerful elites who use their resources to shape the political landscape to their advantage. The result is that the political process becomes a form of theater in which citizens participate, but their ultimate freedom to influence the system is minimal. The modern social contract is also deeply intertwined with economic systems that prioritize profit over human well-being. In today's capitalist societies, the very structure of the economy serves to reinforce the contract between the individual and the system. Workers are expected to contribute to the economy in exchange for wages, while corporations and governments dictate the terms of the exchange. While individuals are technically free to choose their careers and livelihoods, the reality is that economic forces often limit their options and opportunities. The rise of automation, the gig economy, and globalized labor markets has made it increasingly difficult for individuals to break free from the cycle of work and consumption that sustains the modern economic order. In this way, the social contract is less about the protection of individual rights and more about the perpetuation of systems that benefit the elites while maintaining the illusion of freedom for the masses. This raises the crucial question: are we truly free in the modern world, or are we merely trapped in an updated version of the social contract, one that no longer serves our best interests? The modern social contract promises us freedom, security, and the right to choose, but in practice, it often leaves us with very little control over the systems that govern our lives. We are conditioned to believe that our choices matter, that we have the power to shape our destinies, but in reality, the choices we are given are limited and shaped by forces outside our control. The question, then, is whether the modern social contract is a genuine expression of our freedom or merely an elaborate system of control that keeps us complacent in our perceived autonomy. The challenge we face today is how to navigate the modern social contract in a way that reclaims genuine freedom. If the social contract is, in essence, a set of unwritten rules that govern our behavior, then how can we rewrite those rules to better reflect the values of individual autonomy, equality, and justice? Can we truly achieve a society in which the contract is mutually beneficial, where individuals are not merely subjects to systems of power, but active participants in shaping the society they wish to live in? As we continue to question the terms of the modern social contract, we must consider whether true freedom is possible in a world where the rules are constantly being rewritten by powerful forces, and whether we are willing to challenge the status quo in order to create a more just and equitable future. As we reflect on the modern social contract and its evolution, from Hobbes' emphasis on security to Locke's vision of individual rights and Rousseau's paradox of collective freedom, one thing becomes clear: the contract that governs our lives today is far more complex and pervasive than we may realize. It extends beyond the legal boundaries of government, influencing our social interactions, our economic choices, and even the way we perceive our own freedoms. The ideals of liberty, equality, and justice that these philosophers once championed have been refracted through the lens of modernity, shaped by forces of power, technology, and mass media. What seemed like a straightforward agreement between individuals and the state has transformed into a multifaceted web of invisible rules that shape every aspect of our existence. In questioning the modern social contract, we are not just examining the structures of government or society. We are questioning the very nature of freedom itself. Are we truly free, as we like to believe, or are we simply adhering to an illusion that is perpetuated by those in power? From the surveillance of the state to the manipulation of our desires by corporations and digital platforms, the lines between autonomy and control have become increasingly blurred. The freedom we think we have may not be freedom at all, but a well-crafted illusion designed to keep us compliant and distracted. However, this realization is not necessarily a reason for despair. Rather, it is an invitation for critical reflection and perhaps a call to action. The social contract is not a static, unchangeable force. It is something that evolves as societies change. If we recognize the invisible forces that govern us, we can begin to ask important questions. How can we challenge these forces? How can we reclaim our individual freedoms while ensuring the well-being of the collective? How can we reshape the social contract to better reflect our shared values and aspirations? These are the questions that will define the future of our societies, and they require each of us to engage with the world in a more conscious, thoughtful way. In the end, The social contract is not just a historical or philosophical concept, it is a living, breathing part of our everyday lives. It is something we are all constantly negotiating, whether we realize it or not. The choices we make, the systems we support, and the values we uphold are all part of the larger social contract that binds us together. And as we navigate this intricate web of rules, power, and freedom, we must continue to ask, are we truly free, or are we simply part of a system that tells us we are? The answer to this question may not be clear, but the journey to understanding it is the key to unlocking a deeper, more authentic sense of freedom for all.